One consideration, two small questions to Tali Lerner. I really enjoy your paper. And first, the consideration that how beautiful was Hebrew in the 16th century Italy confronted to the poor Hebrew of 18th century, 19th century. So this is just to stress the quality and the richness of the Hebrew in this time. And these two more really small questions. I saw in one of your lectures translated a date according to the Gregorian calendar, and I just question, is this they are using the Gregorian calendar in these letters, or is just a translation from the Jewish calendar? And second, questions about sources besides letters. Did you work on other sources useful to build a story of Jewish youth in Italy?
I know that in my research I found a couple of not replica or the constructed notebooks, but like the real ones, and it's all full of drawings and paintings and maps, and it's very colorful notebooks. And I was wondering if this lady, Rachel, also drew what she remembered that she used to do as a tutor.
Both for Tali and Angie, it's a question about vocabulary. For Tali, very much so, as a follow-on from that previous comment, is that the Hebrew of the period was using biblical Hebrew, and in your opinion, in that you are now in a different country, and the vocabulary that you would use in an emotive sense to express something in your home country is not necessarily there to describe the emotions that you're feeling now in your new country, and therefore by reconstructing what was the notebook, there actually becomes a different language or vocabulary being used. So this is very much in terms of opinion or assumptions, because obviously there's no... But did you actually feel in both cases that what the person wanted to write, they were struggling to do so? And as a consequence, what was written was not truly there. And did this come to a fore, for example, subsequently, that as your research progressed chronologically through the material, you found that it was becoming more coherent?
Also, a question for Angie about languages. Is there any use in Rachel's, any of her writings, of Arabic? Because there is something about the Jewish and Christian populations of the Maghreb, of North Africa, their agency as agents of what you might call European dominion, European culture, and how they were perceived by the local Arab Muslim population. And I'm wondering, because going back to what Gelblum was quoted, unfortunately here, that he said, well, you know, those mountain Jews come and they say, you know, we're French, we are, you know, 2 fingers from Paris on the map, and all that. But then, when you look at them in Morocco, they're European. And it's not just the influence of the Alliance and other, you might say, acculturating agencies, it's their own view. So in Rachel, do you see any reference to Arabs, any reference to the place of Jews in Morocco, and Jews as agents of Spanish culture in Morocco that of course you mentioned?
I would like to add a question of mine to Verena. We talk a lot when we teach about how German Jews understood the situation. How did they understand what is going on? Now, can such a diary, although it doesn't have emotions, can we understand, learn from it? Can it help us to understand what young German Jews, how they were seeing the world during the first years of the war? So this is for you. Since you commented, I will comment that we have to remember that in the Moroccan population, people look down at mountain Jews If you look at the city dwellers, I mean, they wouldn't have written much different than Goldblum. And on the other hand, at least in my town, the Spanish Jews, as they call themselves, the Moroccans, Jews from Spanish Morocco see themselves as much above all the others, and etc. Okay, so we do one round of answers, and then we see what the clock says. We'll start, okay. Verena, you are first because you are first.
Thank you. Because she was last.
No,
so
but okay, but in this special diary, we can, honestly speaking, not learn what young German Jews felt after the war started in '39. Because, as I mentioned, it's not only without emotions, but only his inner... It's not even a mood. It's something like, today I saw air raids, today I learned the piano, and I visited Omama, which was his grandmother, and so on. Of course, in this case, you have to contextualize it, but if we go further, this is also, of course, something that we have to keep in mind, because he himself mentions that he was not a victim to all these events that appeared to school children. He was not harassed, he was not hunted, he was not expelled from school, and so on. And what is in the first months obvious, that he documents not every, but every country which was occupied by Nazi Germany. It was commented, Poland and Norway and the Netherlands and so on. It's not a fascination, but it's interesting that he comments on this. So here we have to contextualize it more.
Okay.
The only visual element that I've seen in this in these notebooks has been a map of her house, which was like, I think I've seen it twice, which makes sense that she would like also reconstruct that.
And can you assume that the way they taught at school was only by writing, or it's just a coincidence?
No, it's a coincidence. Yeah, it's a coincidence. Yeah, she was also taught art. She was also taught. So
how old she was when she wrote it again?
When she wrote them,
yes.
She was already in her 50s. So in relation to the language, Rachel never learned good Hebrew, and she was always in a Spanish-speaking atmosphere, because she was looked after by her children and by her husband. So everybody spoke Spanish around her. She learned a little bit of Hebrew, and actually what I've noticed is, as the notebooks progress, she makes more spelling mistakes, because she gets confused. And she starts using like words in Hebrew, which is very strange. The presence of Arabic among Spanish Moroccan Jews is almost none. I would among Spanish Moroccan Jews don't speak Arabic. They went from speaking Haketia, but like by the end of the 19th century, everybody was speaking Spanish already, because Spanish presence was already there. And by the 20th century, some people took Arabic classes, and some people spoke a little bit for like business, but it was not a language that was part of their everyday life as much as Spanish, for sure, and French. In relation to the perception of others and as agents of Spanish culture, for sure, there are lots of testimonies of how she felt when the Spaniards left, and how the Arabs were very upset with them because they were seeing this mediator role. They were seeing. So yes, that is present and that is described, and she like repeatedly. And I want to say that one thing is patronization, and this feeling of aristocracy of Sephardic Jews, and a different thing is ashpala. That's a different thing. I think humiliation.
By whom?
By Goldblum is speaking in humiliating terms. What Sephardic Jews from the Spanish zone felt was a feeling of aristocracy that one can discuss, one can argue against, but it's not the same thing. When they speak about the Berbers, what you see is patronization. It's not humiliation. That's important for me to say.
Okay, just a minute, we go on. Tali.
Okay, so I think the question about the dates corresponds with the question about the language and the comment about the Hebrew as well. So yes, they use both Hebrew and Gregorian dates, and they often mix them together. But they definitely refer to the Gregorian months and dates of that month on the 2nd of October and so on. So indeed, their Hebrew is outstanding. I mean, their command of the language and the expressions and the biblical quotations is really unusual, especially in the young people's letters, because they have the sources to use and to draw from while writing. But when it comes to nouns, when they have to relate to the material reality of their time, they use Italian or Latinized words. If it's the cheese, the shirts they're wearing, shoes, anything that has to do, and of course business issues, which obviously all the business terms that we use to this day, you know, are derived from Italian sources. That's obvious. So in the same way as Jews in Germany used German terms to relate to their...
Well, today in Israel we use English.
Well, but we do have...
Arabic.
But of course, what you say goes back to what the Yiddishists like to claim, that Yiddish was a spoken language that could describe anything of the daily reality and was part of the daily reality, while Hebrew was don't say a dead language, but not a language that related to the actual reality, and therefore Glicken is much more fun than reading, I don't know if Modena, but definitely Emden or somebody like that, and if we're talking about autobiographies, because her language is a daily language which relates to reality. But nevertheless, I think between Hebrew and Italian, they find a way to relate to actual reality and not to...
And chronologically, do the contents improve, change over the period?
Chronologically, in terms of...
Well, the use of the different vocabulary or the language or the coherency? Or
Well, the correspondence I read are from a limited number of years, so these are the 1560s to the 1580s. I can't tell you what happens in the next decade, but concerning other sources for the history of childhood and youth in Italy in particular, there are many, and I'm not the first one to discuss them. Ronnie Weinstein did quite an extensive work, also writing about ego documents of different sorts, students' notebooks, what teachers wrote about students. There's, well, what Yuda Modena wrote about his childhood. We can discuss the validity of the person who is known to not telling the truth. But there are others, there are legal documents as well, and many other sources, community regulations and so on, sumptuary laws that have to do with the dress of children.
I was thinking of other cases of immigration in which, on the one hand, the man is dispossessed of his power, but that by immigrating with a woman, the woman is actually this social downshifting is actually empowering for her, because it allows her to go out and join the labor force and be independent, and this can change the power dynamics within the couple also. So I was wondering how much of literature is there available about this experience of women, like being forced into a situation that is actually, because I have seen it among my interviewees, that they were thrilled. Yeah. About the idea of being able to work, because in Morocco, you know, if you were from an upper middle class, it was less popular. but then here everybody works. So I think, yeah, I wanted to hear what you think about that.
Okay, Verena.
I found it interesting what you said at the end of your lecture about that the Yekes were not all success stories, because I know that from my own research, and non-Zionist and so on. But could you please explain in which context you research on this, and if this not success stories are also a part of it? This I would like to be interested in.
Can you clarify that?
Sorry?
Can you clarify that? Like what group or what sources or like
No, but these not, it doesn't matter if these are women or men or children or teenagers, but these not successful stories.
Okay.
Because in my interviews, which I found in the Shoah Foundation, I mean 80% of those who could, I understand, were not success stories. Ordinary stories or...
Gotcha.
Okay, Björn, this is your...
Okay, so to Angie's question, they were not feeling empowered at all, usually because the most common profession was to work as an ozeret, as a cleaning lady. And that was the #1 profession for women available in the 1930s Yishuv labor market. So it was quite the opposite. Those were women who had hired cleaning women and laundry women and cooks and whatever in Germany, and now they had to clean themselves. So it was actually quite the opposite. And adding to that was that often they were, and that I know that from interviews, I know that also from a bit from letters that were published in the immigrant media, the Jüdische Rundschau and the Mitteilungsblatt. Those were newspapers of the immigrants. So they wrote about that. So they had to work as cleaning ladies for the Eastern European Jews, and that's obviously was already a conflictual encounter. So it was kind of a re-encounter under very different circumstances, which was one of the main problems in the mind of the German Jews during their immigration.
And generally about the importance of this for historiography?
Yeah. So, and that's maybe also a bit, I can connect that to what Verena asked, that when I started to talk about my research, people tended to be very surprised of all these struggles of the German Jews, because there's in Israel, there's this very common notion that they were so well-to-do, and then we hear these stories that it was hard, but it's always compared, but the other immigrations. And it's not only that historically in the 1930s, that is what the immigrants listened to, you know, what do you want? So you have a problem, we lived in tents. It is also that this is also echoed in a way in the research literature. This German Jewish group is not, I would say, in Israel, one touching the hot topics that are discussed currently in Israeli historiography for different reasons. But the historiography of the German Jews in Israel is that at first they wrote it themselves. A lot of historians who immigrated to mainland Palestine began writing this history, and they did that by firstly talking about the contributions, which was very important for them, to write themselves into the Zionist narrative, and then secondly to write kind of about the eventual integration. And then in the 90s, there was another kind of research scholar thought from two different countries, from Germany and Israel, who are not, I mean, they're very different in the way they work, and also in the conclusions and in everything, I would say, in short. But that was using kind of from the Israeli side against that narrative, like Amiron that you mentioned, and Yotam Chotam, who did something very different and did not try to write this contribution history. We did that, and we changed the law and whatever. But just to look on the individual immigrants. So, and then there was not much social history at all. So what stayed usually was that what remained was this narrative still of this well-to-do immigrants. So always kind of look well-to-do with their problems compared to others, but obviously
the Yekes Museum is all about this.
Right. Yeah, it is. But still, but when you look on the memoirs, I mean that's the point. Those who write, and I did also. I chose not to work so much with memoirs, but I did a lot of oral history as well. So obviously when you look on the people who wrote the memoirs, they don't write about these struggles. They also don't write about a lot of things that German Jewish women, I mean obviously very few cases, there was a very big fear that they would become prostitutes. there was a fear that German Jewish women were so naive that they would go out with Arab men and British men, chas v'chalila. So those were very big discussions at the time, and you cannot find any of that, neither in memoir literature. In oral history, you can find it when you ask for that. That was actually, if I may, something I wanted to ask you. You know, and I do oral history like kind of from an historian point of view, but what we do with these documents that people give us, and we are in the situation, not you, but the three of us, with like witnesses who are still alive. And it's a methodological point, maybe you can discuss it also later. It's also a kind of an ethical issue, because in your case you got all this precious material. So when you work with that, what do you do if you raise like critical points? And that's, for example, I heard in the interviews that I did so much blatant racism towards not only Arabs but also towards Mizrahi Jews of early immigration wave, of Gemini Jews, for example. For sure. So.
And could you say a few words about it? Because you find it only, of course, in these families and other places, but it could be very explaining when you talk about young people growing up in a rich family, etc., etc. So, and to Viola, I got the first guy you mentioned, Bear. He came here, stayed, became an illegal, went to Prague, and then was asking, how can I come back? Is it unique, or are there many like this? Because it's because we're talking about 37. In 37, the British are already stopping immigration to Palestine, etc., etc. So just some notes about this.
Yeah.
Would clarify it.
Okay, so of course, hiring a teacher, a melamed, to teach in the household framework is a medieval and a well-established tradition, and probably the most common way before the early modern period, where more public or community-founded schools started formatting. And he often taught not only the children of the household, but also other relatives, poorer relatives or other children at the same time. But later in life, the 10, 11, 13-year-old men, and that we know from many documents, have left the house to study with a similar teacher elsewhere outside the household. And obviously this person has interesting position in the household. Glickel, you know, in a different context. In Germany, she talks about one of her household members is half melamed, half servant. So you can see what these people, and people talk about memories about being such a melamed as a pretty miserable position, being half a servant or so on. So, but since these are in many ways under the radar positions because they're not regulated by the community, we don't know much about, besides assuming that they would.
You can find a lot about them because they didn't leave any memoirs, they didn't leave any references, and nobody reacts to them. So just in Ego documents, you could find a lot of information about them. In such sort of families that.
Yeah, I mean, we have a limited number of video documents to discuss. So, this is more or less what we can say. Sometimes they get into trouble, like servants in the household and female servants and pregnant women that appear suddenly pregnant and so on. But this is when things like that appear in court. But not much more than that.
So, like letters who spoke about immigration certificates, there were a few, not so many. He was not the right address for that, of course. Not for most of the questions. Georg Landau and also the other members were not the right address. They wrote to him anyhow. What they usually did was, and I think you could see that in one of the letters, Landauer usually wrote on the top of the letter for his secretary, a woman, Meta, please tell this man to go to the branch of Instituto Germania in Haifa and go to the consultation hours with Dr. Fischer and talk to him. That's what they usually did. They could not help him. And what that bear wanted was help in receiving this certificate. I think what he wanted to do, I have only one other case where it was indeed successful. There was this, he wanted a C certificate for a chalutz. So, and those were obviously not distributed either by the German department, but by the Palestine office in Berlin. But they had this quota for veteran Zionists that they could bring in, even though they would not meet the standards that you had to meet, like for men only until 35. For German men, they had this exemption until 45. And I think that was why they aimed to talk about the veteran Zionist background. There are a few cases where they managed to do that, but then they really personally knew Landauer, and then he did do it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for an excellent